Sight of you, so I lost myself. Sorry. Junction Reads exists in Tikaranto, which is covered under Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. It is the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Anishinaabe, including the Chippewas and Mississaugas of the Credit. Gurjinder joins us from Delta, BC, on the unceded territories of the Tsawwassen, Musqueam, and other Coast Salish peoples. As settlers and newcomers, we acknowledge and accept our responsibility to care for the land and its resources, while also recognizing the continued displacement and colonization of First Nations peoples across Turtle Island. We are grateful to work in the community on their territory. Welcome, Gurjinder. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We were just seconds ago talking about Super Bowl. I don't know if anyone is going to have both the game on and this on, but
Nothing happens in the first 30 minutes anyway, so I
yeah,
think you're okay.
exactly. So before we get started, will you share what you're reading right now or book recommendations that
Yes.
people can steal?
What I'm reading right now is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy.
Oh.
It is not a book I would normally read because I do not like books set in the 1800s westerns. It's not a for me thing. I love Cormac McCarthy though, and it is my son's favorite book. And so he has recommended numerous times that I read it. So I have been reading it for a week. It is extremely difficult. So I've actually been listening to it and reading it at the same time. So highly recommend that because the narration is fantastic. But it is nobody builds a world better than Cormac McCarthy. And so, with that, it's such an interesting book study because you really don't have a point of view of a person, but you have a point of view of a time that is violent and brutal. And it's been a really intense read, so much so that I have to read other things as well. So, in conjunction, I'm taking breaks from it and I started reading The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafik. Excellent book. Part of it is told from the perspective of a fig tree. Never thought I could get behind that, but I highly, highly recommend. It's a great storytelling.
I love those. I love books with those unique perspectives, especially in nature, like not necessarily animals so much, but nature. I am going to share your biography if that's okay, and then you're going to
Sure.
give us a reading, which I'm very excited about.
Wonderful.
Um, Gurjinder Basran is the award-winning author of 3 novels. Everything Was Goodbye from Penguin Canada was winner of the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize and a Chatelaine Magazine Book Club pick. Someone You Love Is Gone, also from Penguin Canada and Harper Perennial, and Help, I'm Alive from ECW Press. A Simon Fraser University Writer Studio alumna, hailed by the CBC as one of 10 Canadian women writers you need to read, Basran balances the demands of her creative life with her other career in the tech sector. She is currently the Director of Learning, Development, and Communications at Bell Canada. She lives in Delta, BC with her family, which I said already. Thank
And
you.
my dog, which you may hear in the background somewhere.
What's that?
I said, and you may also hear my dog, which
Oh,
she will make herself known.
nice. Love.
Um, Thank you for the lovely introduction, Allison. The wedding is told from so many perspectives, 15 perspectives to be exact. And it's through the various perspectives stitched together that you get a sense of the wedding and the community as a whole. So I'm going to read two small pieces from two different perspectives. The first one is from the groom, um, and it's from a chapter called Basic Baby. Baby was sitting in his parked car in front of the old sweet shop building for the second time this week. He hadn't set out to go there, and yet there he was, car still on, windshield wipers swiping every few seconds, defroster blasting, fog circles clearing. His family hadn't lived in the apartment above the shop for over 10 years. Yet in his mind, it was home. And when he wasn't thinking about where he was going or what he was doing, he ended up navigating the familiar childhood streets of there and back again, sometimes until he'd gone too far and had to aggressively cross 3 lanes of traffic or U-turn to course correct. He'd been 16 when they moved into the house with the gated driveway and 3 garages, a house where he and his older brother Gobind no longer had to share a bedroom or even a bathroom, for the house had many. 6 toilets. He can still remember how excited his mother was about this, even though she'd often complained about having to clean the one bathroom they'd all shared in the apartment. But the not sharing, to his mother, was a good thing. Walk-in closets, a butler's pantry, en-suites, 2 family rooms, and a living room, she'd said when they toured the house. Think of all the space you'll have. When they moved in, Baby had been unable to sleep. He'd grown used to the sound of sirens, the sounds of the homeless scavenging for scraps in the dumpster out back, and now all he heard was the occasional car slowing down on the nearby traffic calming roundabout. On the weekends, sometimes hours would pass by without him seeing anyone. He actually had to look for his mother, his brother, his father, when previously they'd always been right in front of him, always there in his way, in his space, encroaching, questioning, interfering. And to his surprise, it was that proximity that he missed the most, the being next to and being with, the never being alone that he suddenly longed for. A buzzing. His phone in the cup holder lit up. It was Devi. He didn't answer. He couldn't listen the way she wanted him to, and each time she noticed that he was only yaying her, that he didn't really care about the caterer, the photographer, or the wedding planner, she freaked out. She'd become one of those women on reality shows, one of those women who point their fingers or palms at someone's face to say no, as if the word were not enough. He tucked the phone into his pocket and turned off the engine, watching as the rain fell onto the windshield, blurring the blinking neon open sign in front of him. The door chimed, announcing his arrival. About time you came in. Hassan, dressed in his usual silk shirt and dress slacks, was standing behind the front counter, cracking rolls of quarters into the cash register. You've been sitting in your car for 30 minutes. Hassan tried to stifle his grin, but Baby knew he was happy to see him. So what are you stalking me now? Baby slid into his favorite booth, the one that was closest to the counter and gave the best view of the TV. The same one he and Govind sat at every day after school when his parents were working and they were too little to stay upstairs by themselves. He stared up at the screen, the hockey game on but muted. I should say the same. 11 years and I haven't been able to get rid of you? Hassan said, still smiling. Hungry? He didn't wait for Baby to answer and yelled to the cook, Kebab and fries for Baby. Everyone called Nanak Baby on account of the sweet shop. Most people assumed the family business was named after him, or that he was named after the business, but neither was true. His parents had meant to call the shop Baba Nanak's, just like the one his Baba had in India, but a print error at the sign shop had changed that. His father had blamed his mother for not filling in the form properly. Her handwriting was crowded. She should have printed it in capital letters like the instructions said, and his mother had blamed his father for not checking the proof properly. But fault did nothing to solve the matter, and since they couldn't afford a new awning and sign, the name was changed and his infant likeness was added to the sweet shop. Aunties, even the ones who didn't know him, still pinched his cheeks and remarked on what a cute baby he was, as if he were still the fat little baby on the box. As much as he hated being called baby, it was better than being called Laddu or Glab Jamun or all the other pet names his Boston auntie had for him. Baby turned up the volume on the TV. He wasn't a big hockey fan, but the sound of the game was comforting. The commentator's flat voice called out plays and passes, the hushed anticipation as a player broke down the ice, the crowd erupting. All of it reminded him of growing up here, above the shop. He and Gobind used to play hockey by the dumpster in the alley, but with just the two of them, it wasn't much of a game. Occasionally, when his father had time, he would come out and play, but with only 2 sticks, it was mostly just slap shot practice. His father in his dirty white apron and secondhand Fair Isle sweater, his father with his thick mustache and full head of hair, his father who smelt like oil, Old Spice, and frying oil, yelling out, "He shoots, he scores," before dropping his stick and taking a victory lap around the metal bin. So that's a little bit from our groom's perspective. As you can tell, as he gets closer to the wedding, I think he's getting a bit nervous and nostalgic at the same time. Um, and Allison, I'll just go ahead and read a little bit about his father, who has taken to driving taxi to help supplement the family's income. That's from a chapter called No Through Road. Satnam had been driving in circles. The taxi queue, already full with cabbies anticipating the onslaught of international arrivals, forced him to circumnavigate the airport for 15 minutes. As he on-ramped and off-ramped his way through the terminal loops, he berated himself for not having arrived earlier. Had it not been for Bulbir, her incessant list-giving, and reminders of all that he had yet to do for the wedding, he would have been on time. Satnam tried to put his wife out of his mind, yet there she was every few minutes, rattling around in the back of his head, a migraine of inadequacies, his and hers. Did she not see how hard he was working, toiling at the shop for 8 hours, driving for 10, and sleeping only when the fatigue was greater than his worries? He glanced at the top of his balding head in the rearview mirror. "Waheguru," he said, pulling into an open spot in the queue. He had a habit of saying this every time something went his way, an acknowledgement of God in the moment. He closed his eyes and listened to the kirtan on the radio, humming along with the devotional song. He hadn't been a religious person before the accident. Though he believed in God and had gone to the Gurdwara regularly, he hadn't dwelled on the meaning of life. He was too busy for philosophy, too practical for theology. That changed after the accident. Suddenly, the day-to-day of the sweet shop and of raising family seemed so pointless. And once Gobind returned home from the hospital, much to his wife's dismay, Satnam went to India. Unlike his past trips that focused on the upkeep of their ancestral land, this trip was a pilgrimage. The night his son was shot, he'd sat in the hospital chapel and prayed, promising that if his son lived, he too would be born again. Although he explained all of this to Bulbir, she was unmoved, and when he set out to Hemkund Sahib, the star-shaped Gurdwara set on a glacial lake high in the Himalayas, she didn't even wish him luck. Due to the terrain and altitude, the temple was only accessible for a few months each year, and it was there in the mountains that he found peace. After eating langar, he sat by the lake and closed his eyes, listening to the hollow winds that reminded him of the temporal nature of life. But somehow, when he descended from the mountaintop, when he returned to the noise of his village, the lesson was gone, replaced by life's burdensome nature. That night when he slept, he dreamt that the elusive snow leopard who lived near Hemkund Sahib came into his home and lay down by the fire, the flames glinting in his amber eyes. When he told his cousins about the dream, his cousins said it was a sign and referred him to a holy man. Satnam had expected this man to be a Swami of sorts, the type of bad actor one sees in a Hindi movie with a white beard, saffron robes, and wooden beads. But the man was entirely different. He looked like an accountant, sensible shoes, gray slacks, and a cotton short-sleeved button-down shirt, so thin that his undershirt showed through. The man had a trim hairstyle, gelled and parted to the side. His face was shiny, as if he had just applied lotion, and his entire demeanor was a mouse-like apology. Instead of rolling open scrolls, as Satnam had expected, the man pulled a laptop from his leather case and showed him maps of the sky, trigonometry-like charts, and mathematical equations. "Put simply, sir," he finally said, "you have entered a 7-year cycle of upheaval. Things will improve for you only when the cycle is complete." The cycle was now almost complete. October 17th, 2022 was the date he was given, a date that he counted down to the way his children, when they were young, counted down the days until Christmas. He didn't tell his wife any of this. She wouldn't have believed him. She didn't believe in much and was about as thoughtful as a pounding fist, always reducing their lives to balance sheets and bill payments. the cost of living. They had just taken out a second mortgage on the house to finance their venture into frozen sweets when Baby had announced his plans to marry. Satnam had tried to coax him to wait in hopes that the upheaval cycle would end and usher in a new era of prosperity, buoyed by their business expansion. But Baby had insisted. So Satnam had taken to driving his cousin's taxi to help pay for the mounting debt. At last sum, their share of the wedding expenses was $250,000. Had it not been for Devi and her family, the wedding would have been modest, a temple wedding, a reception in a community hall, the other events at home celebrated with close family. But perhaps they weren't entirely to blame. It was the entire Punjabi community that had gone mad with their show and pomp, their need to outdo each other. He shook his head just thinking about the absurdity. $20,000 for an elephant? That was one of the few times he'd said no, and he could see the relief on Baby's face when he struck down the idea. No, his son would not be riding an elephant to the Gurdwara. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. That is
Thank
such
you.
such a great scene, and a $500,000 wedding was like, oh my gosh. Um, it's also I was hoping you were going to continue reading, but it wouldn't make sense to anyone who hasn't read the book because the character that is coming soon is brought that connection that comes back at the end with twin it you did such a great job connecting with that coming up. But I'll start with a question about the structure. You mentioned there's 15 points of view. It's about a multi-generational family, the drama surrounding a wedding, but the novel opens with Jasvir's point of view. She's the great
Yes,
aunt of the bride with the delivery of the wedding invitation and the sweets from the bride's grandmother, which in and of itself is
scandalous.
pretty dramatic. Um, but it's like just these people proving to each other that they are better than the bride side or better than the groom side. But this section says so much more. And I wanted you to talk about why you chose Jasvir to open the novel and why this particular point of view was important for you.
Yeah, in some ways, I thought, oh, it might not make sense. She's not a central character in the novel, but I think there's something about she's the first person to receive the wedding invitation, or one of the first people. And so, with that, you get an opening into their family history.
Mm-hmm.
Does she like the family? What had happened in the family? What beefs are there? Um, and it's been my experience whenever I was invited to a wedding, that being invited to a wedding becomes a exercise in self-reflection. And so, of course, you're happy for the people that are getting married, but now you're rethinking every decision you ever made. Not
Right.
only are you thinking you have to go to this wedding, but you're thinking about, well, what's my marriage like? What are my children's marriages like? And that's exactly what happens for Jasvir. So on the one hand, she's thinking about the relationship she has with her sister-in-law, the granddaughter, which is Devi, who's getting married, but she's also thinking about her own children
Mm-hmm.
and her own marriages and the life choices she's made and the things she hasn't done. And I think this happens a lot for us when we're watching somebody come to this big milestone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we can only help but reflect on that milestone for ourselves or the lack of it, even.
Mm-hmm. And there's two towards the end, there's two sections that are also kind of uh, mark or remarking on the occasion when Satnam, the character that you mentioned, the father of the groom, enters the wedding. He's got this feeling like he's the star of a Bollywood
Yeah.
film, right? And that speaks to I mean, I already had it in my head. The extravagance of this $500,000 wedding was already kind of building itself up in my mind. And the kind of soap opera family drama of the novel leading up to that point. I could really feel the like emotional tension, but also the relief in that moment. Um,
And there's
beyond.
a lot of pride, I think in community in moments like this, it's a yes, it's some showing off, but it's also I've made it. Like
Yeah,
all of my sacrifices have been worth it. Yeah.
exactly. But also in that, in talking about the perspectives that you share, we get this perspective of Mrs. Richardson,
Oh
who is
yeah.
a neighbor, a white woman with, unspoken feelings about her neighbors, unspoken feelings about these loud parties she's been listening to. And I mean, for me, it was a super important perspective to hear in relation to what the novel is talking about. But why her? Why did you choose to include that?
It was becoming so much a book about community.
Hmm.
Um, internally, but also I wanted to provide the perspective of what other people feel looking into the community, right?
Yeah.
And the tension that we get, whether it's through Mrs. Richardson, seeing that her neighborhood has changed. There's Indian people everywhere and these cooking smells and the noise, 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 right? It's not the same. I too have had those feelings about my neighborhood. I've lived in my neighborhood for like my entire life and it's changed. And sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm becoming Mrs. Richardson, right?
Mhm.
And it's our ability to accept and understand change, and not to hold on to our ways of thinking. But I
Mhm.
think there's all kinds of tension in the community. There's even tension with Twinkle. She's an international student. She has a very different cultural experience than, the key players in the book. And so
Mhm.
just to show that there's this tension of community in the inner circle, but there's all these people that are on the fringe that are they're really impacted by the ways we live and how we live together.
Yeah. And Jag too, also a great character. There's just so many fantastic perspectives. But um, Priya, who is this freelance journalist, told by a producer she doesn't have a face for television, which we are to assume means her skin's too dark. She just doesn't look. She doesn't have the coveted. Sorry, I'm gonna look coveted golden skin. Coveted
Mhm.
golden ratio is the word.
Yes.
And this was kind of in finishing the novel and in thinking about it as a Bollywood film, if that is what we're feeling about the novel at the end, this kind of felt like the anvil, like that Bollywood film trope, the
Hmm.
message that's being hammered home, because we're considering throughout the novel how people look, their hair, their makeup, even Baby says something. I meant to write it down. I meant to quote it. How he describes Devi is is a was a moment for me, because he doesn't describe her as this like essence of beauty, which is how you would
Hmm.
dream your soon to be husband would describe you to friends or whatever. But the way that he describes Devi and Gobi's in a wheelchair, and like the idea of how we look and how functional our bodies are, or how beautiful our bodies are, and Motu also with losing 130 pounds.
Yeah.
Is that the anvil of the story for you? Is that really the message of the story for you? How we judge and
I
shame
think,
and perceive one another?
yeah, I think so. Partly, I think it's how we judge each other. We have very narrow views of what beautiful is. We have very narrow views of what success is, right? It's all around like money and what's your title, what's your uh, job. And I think that that's like true of many communities, not just the Punjabi
Yeah.
community. But it is we how it keeps us back. We rail against it, and at the same time we reinforce it.
Hmm.
And so very much about the ways we I think it's on the back cover, the way we lift each other up, but then ensnare each other. Like
Hmm.
everything is a trap.
Yeah.
It's like be modern, but not too modern. Be
Yeah.
beautiful, not too beautiful. Be successful, be rich, not too rich.
Yeah.
Not so rich that people are going to be envious the way they are of some of these characters. And so yeah, it's very much about the way we keep each other trapped
Yeah.
and how people do want to move beyond that. Even we see Jasvir in her first chapter wanting to have a different life, but you can almost, by the end of her first chapter, you can almost see that, well, she can't quite do it, right? It requires a level of courage and a level of breaking through in ways we just haven't seen yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so funny because I had great hope for her. There's a sign on the front lawn. She goes to that condo. I'm dreaming reading this novel that she moves into that incredible condo. Does she not? Does she not
I don't
have that
know.
life?
Maybe she does, but I think it's like, the last bit of that scene, you can read it so many ways, but she starts to eat the sweets,
Yeah.
and she eats one sweet and then she eats another sweet, and it's a thickening sameness and a thickening
Yeah.
sweetness. And to me, I think we love our patterns, right? It's so familiar. It feels so good to know what we're doing and to be in control of our small little chaos ball, even if we hate it.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I hope she does. We could probably write another book about her.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and you mentioned entrapment. I actually had a question about confinement. It's like
Hmm.
just as you said there, right? As human beings, we are um, creatures of habit. We like our rituals. We do things at the same time every day, and that can be said about traditions, family traditions, the things we repeat at Christmas and Thanksgiving and summer holidays and whatever. And so
Mhm.
I did have that feeling like some characters are trapped, are confined, including physically confined. But then there is also this ex- exuberant connection to tradition and comfort in tradition that some of them find.
Yeah, and I think my husband always says, do you control it or does it control you? And I think that's like so much about this book. Is culture controlling them, or are they kind of taking the pieces that they want? And I think oddly enough, it's the people that end up not being confined in the book are the people that are seemingly most confined. Like you have Baby's brother who's confined to a wheelchair, and he has an arc that actually speaks to that. Oh, well, out of all of them, he may have the freest life.
Mhm.
And same with Motu, who in some ways was confined in a larger body. And
Yeah,
now she's lost all this weight, but now she's confined by other people's expectations of who she should be in this smaller body.
yeah,
And so you see them trying to, I think, are the closest to breaking out of some of those patterns.
yeah. Especially with I mean, we're not giving away the ending, but the announcement at the end and those two little additions from the local gossip
Paper from Priya.
gossip magazine, if come community newspaper, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so what? Oh, I should have put those in a different order. So codependence is also a kind of theme, I guess. This idea that Devi feels in, moving towards marrying Baby, she in experiencing going to be married soon does something she shouldn't do. Um, but in a way, it speaks to her codependence, not on another person, but her codependence on how she's perceived by other people, right? Like she's as dependent on people's perception of her as other people would be on someone's love, right? Like on someone making dinner, on someone
Mhm.
driving them to work, on how we start to rely on people in our lives. She's relying on the perception that people have of her. Do you think she's going to escape it? Because I felt happy at the end, but also not really happy for her.
I think she will escape it eventually, maybe when she's 40 or 50. I think it will take a while. I think it will take a while for her to make the same mistakes over and again. Not to say that, her marriage won't work or anything, but, she's I think she's not unlike a lot of people right now to be able to separate oneself from the image of themselves that they portray. Like she's
Mhm.
very dependent on what do people think of me on social media? Who am I who am I in relation to my family, my spouse, my job, his job. She's not at the place yet where she can define who she is as a person. And I think it is her mother in her mother's chapter that says that women are often defined by, who they are in relation to one another, and they don't really exist. They're root and fruit of somebody else.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's going to be Debbie's experience. It will take her some time and some more life experience to realize she actually has to have a point of view that
Mhm.
is an interior point of view that is not the projection of self or
Yeah.
self in relation to others. I think it will take a while. And I don't, like I said, I don't think that's too different of a journey that most people take.
Yeah.
It's just so easy to see it in others.
Yeah, exactly. I guess and that scene with the mother was so brilliant. I loved just as a writer, I love the mention of this cliched Instagram poet. I just thought it was so great. And Rahman is both critical of and moved by this cliched poetry. As you said, love is the root, love is the fruit. And she goes into this full-on panic thinking about her daughter getting married and is this what she wants? Is she, why is she doing this? And she says in the narration is women were raised to exist in relation to an invalidation of another, a mother, a sister, a daughter, a niece, a wife, and that's all she was, root and fruit. Um, and that to me kind of goes against, as I was saying, this feeling of a happy ending, right? Like you're
Hmm.
happy in the end, but can we really be happy when there's so much um codependence? I don't want to use the word codependence, but when there's so much um of what we have to do in life,
Hmm.
we must do, or we're expected to do, or people like, people will not think that we're successful if we don't do it. Like, how do we get a happy ending when we're constantly being perceived as not
I
doing the
think
right.
it comes up a lot. Like I think even in Jasvir's chapter, there's a point where she talks about that, she's only ever known women to be addicted to suffering, and she wonders if it's genetic and that women tend to feel ashamed that's not their own.
Yeah,
Right? And so it's all those relationships to others. But in terms of how do you get a happy ending, I don't know. I think this is maybe just fallacy of life that we are deserved a happy ending or that we could even know what that is. Like
right.
to to me, a happy ending means nothing comes after it. Like it's much to me, it's much more interesting. It's a cliche to say the journey is more interesting. It is much more interesting to see where things go than to work towards a defined happy ending.
Yeah. I
Like
have,
I always thought as a child, like the interesting part of a fairy tale is the part they
yeah,
don't tell. Like after what happens after the happily ever after, and I think I've probably ended it that way in the novel where you wonder, well,
yeah,
what will happen? Do they get a happily ever after, and what does that even look like?
yeah. I had this question when I sat down to read the book. I thought, okay, this is just as a writer, I thought this is going to be an experience. And I tried not to read it from a writer's perspective, but in thinking how you would arc the story, in that not necessarily a Bollywood way, like where you have to
Hmm.
hit the marks of a Bollywood film, but how you would hit the marks of a well-structured novel. And you managed to do that by by interconnecting all these lives, right? Like, so from chapter to chapter, it's not that this character is talking to the next character. This character could be talking to a character 5 chapters from now, or you know the scene with Satnam in the taxi cab. That scene speaks to a chapter like 10 later. When you were sitting down to structure this in thinking, it has been described as a Bollywood film. I also want to talk to you about that, whether or not that's how you imagined it or not. But when you sat down to structure not just the characters, but the plot points of the novel, how did you do that? How did you fit all that together?
At first, I didn't. I was very much writing character by character. Sometimes they linked and sometimes they didn't. And some of the early feedback was that it was enjoyable, but it wasn't coming together and we weren't moving forward. Like it wasn't
Right.
progressing with a pace and attention that a novel needed. And so luckily I found a map of a Jane Austen book. I think it was Pride and Prejudice, where
Hmm.
she had mapped out all, or somebody had mapped out all of the characters in the book and how they were linked to each other.
Right.
And so that's what I did. I wrote down all the characters in the book and I made sure that they linked to each other somehow. So where there was no relationship, I made a relationship, and then I went back in and I rewrote and I dropped the breadcrumbs that I've mentioned this name. It's going to come back a few times so that the reader would feel like the person came up with their own chapter at the exact right time.
Hmm.
Um, but it wasn't until I really started thinking about how are these people linked
Yeah.
and how can I tell the broader story of the wedding. Um, if I really didn't want to write a book about a wedding in the way we think about weddings and narrative. Like if I think about all the movies I've seen of a wedding, there is a wedding, there's cold feet, there's will they, won't they? There's probably a meet cute at the beginning, there's a chase scene,
Yeah.
happily ever after, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's classic and we love it and
Yeah.
and I love it, but I didn't want to do that. Um and so I wasn't thinking about it at all to the detriment of the novel. And so then I realized I had to put in some pacing points where you wondered, like, is there going to be a wedding? Like,
Yeah.
are we going to get there?
Hmm.
Um, so it was a lot of painstaking restitching of relationships and how they connected and bits of information that characters would give about what was happening or the gossip, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. I have two questions. I want to talk to you about Bollywood, and then I have another question. But if anyone else has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and Kaylee will ask on your behalf. Before we talk about the Bollywood theme, I want to talk about the brothers because in putting the book down at the end, I thought, okay, why am I so attached emotionally to Baby and Govinder? Like they are probably for me the most beautiful relationship in the book. They love each other. I trust their relationship, I think, more than I even trust the mother daughter relationships, the sister relationships. And I want to talk about that. Why was it important for you to have these brothers be such a trustworthy connection, such a perfect bonded pair?
It wasn't really anything I did intentionally. I think it's because I see that in my I have two grown sons.
Hmm.
They have a perfect bonded relationship. And I also see that in other brothers that are in the family. And I just see like how stabilizing it is for
Hmm.
them. And I've wanted to write more and more male friendship type relationships because I don't think men have a lot of friends or those kinds of things aren't really written about in this way. And so to just show that that was kind of the core of the family, that those two were going to have each other's back and they understood each other deeply and they
Hmm.
showed up for each other, even if they think the other person is wrong. Um, and so that's probably like my personal life just seeping into, wanting to show that relationship.
Yeah, it
I'm
really
sorry, you had a part two to that question. I can't remember it
it
because
was lovely. No, no, the bigger question I want to talk about is the Bollywood, is imagining this as a Bollywood film, and in talking about plot points and structuring of a novel, a Bollywood film is just that. Like if there is a style of film, a style of writing that has this must happen here, this must happen here, this must happen here, it's a Bollywood film. So because it's talked so much about when anyone reviews the novel or talks about the novel, I wanted to talk to you about that because it doesn't feel very tropish. It doesn't, the novel, reading the novel doesn't feel like, it doesn't feel expected or like I'm on a road trip that's been mapped out
Hmm.
very clearly. So I wanted to talk to you about that relationship between how the book is described and how you hold the book.
I think when I thought about the book in terms of Bollywood, I think there's aspects of Indian life. It's high drama in our
Yeah.
families, right? And that's always it's always in the Bollywood movie. And if you watch any, there's always like thunder and violins, soundtracking that, oh my God, can you believe that happened? And so there's points in this book where like things like that happen, like the small snub of the sweets are from the wrong sweet shop would be
Oh,
a thunder, lightning, moment, insult. Oh, my honor is, disgraced. And so there are elements like that where you have like, yeah, the gossiping aunties, you've got the showmanship, you've got all of that that is akin to the community. I think it's just really easy to kind of the Bollywood wrapper around it.
yeah.
Um, but in a way, I wanted to take everything we thought about Indian weddings and Bollywood and turn it on its head a little bit.
Hmm.
And that I would write a book about this Indian community, but I would write it in a way that would surprise you. So I think a lot of people would come to the book thinking this is going to be like a light romantic comedy. I'm going to feel great. And there are moments of that, but I also want you to think about things a little bit deeper. I want you to think about the characters later, and I want you to think about yourself. And I hope that I've accomplished that. So I suppose the Bollywood is a bit of a lure.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a there'll be some fun, but there'll be some there'll be some high drama, but there'll be some depth too.
Yeah. I came across and people if out there watching, people here right now, if you have heard this word dom-com, I hadn't heard it
I haven't
until
heard that word.
so it's a dom-com is a domestic comedy, like a family thing. And I thought, man, that if I were to describe the my ideal book, it would be that. It would be this like family full of what there was a scene I can't remember, apologies, I can't remember who it's between, but it's I think it's Jasvir and her daughter at the beginning where she talks about hating family. You hate your family, and the daughter's like, "No, I don't hate them." But there's this like feeling of when she says, "Are you ever gonna contact them after I die?" And there's this feeling like, as a reader, you're like, "No, maybe I won't.
Exactly.
Like I'm never gonna see them again." But there is so much beauty in that conflict and tension and love you hate you
Yeah, and we have it a
it's
lot
brilliant.
in our community of like you do something wrong and be like, gosh, well, you might as well have just killed me. Like I think that the photographer's mother, she goes on, you might as well just have killed me. You might as well have thrown me to the dogs, thrown me in the well. Like it's that much. I remember seeing a bit of an Indian movie the other day, and the mother was so upset about something her son did, and she's like, I'm going to slit my wrists. And she makes a striking motion, and he's like, number one, that's a butter knife. Number two, you're doing it the wrong way, right? And it's just like again, high drama and the ridiculousness of families and how we interact. I love that. Dom-com. I'm going to use that from now on.
Yeah, I know. It's so good. And the date, I mean, I could probably go on, but the dating scene between Sonia and Rishi the photographer, so good. And everything that comes after that is so great. He's not an engineer and
Oh yeah.
I just read another, and I couldn't remember what it was, novel about a character who went to university but didn't actually go to university and spent all the money. And um, if anyone here, I think it was a Junction Reads book, but anyway, thank you so much. Kaylee, do we
Thank you.
have any questions?
Me too. We have a question from Maria. And Maria says, I would love to know more about your process, specifically how your day job and writing fit together, or if they do.
Oh, I'd like to know more about that too, Maria. They don't fit very well together. In some ways they do, in some ways they don't. It's probably a benefit to my day job because I do believe that everything is story. And so when I think about learning and development, when I think about comms, I'm always thinking about like what story are we trying to tell? How do I make this resonate? How do we make this learning hit? And so it definitely benefits work. It hasn't come into my writing life too much in terms of topics. Um, but I think it's helped me with discipline. Like I'm when I decide to write, and that's like a big um, italicized W when, I can be really disciplined about it, and I will hit deadlines, I will hit timelines. So I treat it like a second job. Um, I don't go as far as to make a work back schedule or a project management board, but you never know. Um, in terms of process, I do find work takes up the bulk of my intellectual capacity, Monday to Friday. Um, and so I spend most of my time not writing. I think about writing a lot.
Mhm.
I read a lot, and I have a lot of great people in my life that read. And so when I'm not writing, I'm aware that I'm always germinating ideas. And so I just have like random post-its around, or I write things down as they interest me. And I know somehow over time they're going to come together in some idea. And then I'll feel the need to actually sit down and write. And then I'll generally use weekends, vacation time to actually do it. So I wish I could say I'm the person that I write, 30 minutes before work and 30 minutes after work a day, but that's not true. I don't journal. I don't do anything until I have like a good, solid idea.
Yeah. And I mean, I sort of I believe, I'm sure I'm not the only person who believes this, that a first draft is actually a second draft. Because if you're the kind of writer, and I am definitely this person, where there's so much thought that happens before some months, like year before the actual story gets out. So I think that
Yeah, absolutely.
you're finally sitting down to write something, it's actually the second draft, not the first draft.
Let's hope so. Whew.
Right. What are you working on right now?
Right now I'm working on the not writing part. And so I'm really working at just writing down things that interest me. Um, I do have a feeling that I am going to switch lanes a little bit. And I tend to do that. I don't really necessarily write the same way each book.
Mm.
So I I am interested in writing something that is set in the near future. Um,
Yeah.
I am interested to see where the world is going and would like to kind of lean into that. Um, Obviously, I think a lot of my writing is always informed by things that are going on. So uh,
Yeah.
there's certainly enough interesting material happening in the news and in the world um,
Yeah. If you could
that
write
I'm
a
going to.
write a novel that starts maybe 4 years from now, like just throwing that timeline out there,
Yeah.
see where we're gonna go from here.
You'll know if I'm an optimist or a pessimist then.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Where is the sun still shining, or
Exactly.
is it a giant light like this TV show I'm watching right now,
Yeah.
Paradise?
It's a
Um,
funny thing though, right? I think this period of not writing, I always panic a little bit and I think I'll never have another good idea. Um, Now I've just kind of learned to just trust something. All these random bits will come together in something.
yeah,
Nothing is wasted.
no. Yeah, especially if that is your plan to do something near future-ish, and
Hmm.
all of this like, I wish, fiction unraveling before our eyes. I mean, it's so unbelievable that no matter what you write about the near future, it's going to be more believable than what we're
Oh, I
actually.
know. Can't make this stuff up.
No, exactly.
No.
Does anyone else have any more questions? No? That's it? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I am so impressed by this novel. I urge everyone to go out and buy a copy. I have